A short presentation giving you some tools to use when analyzing political rhetoric, and in this example, analyzing a political speech, as you're going to do today. When analyzing political rhetoric and speeches, you are simply just going to use the same tools as you use when analyzing non-fiction generally. And here we use the rhetoric pentagram, you can call it both, where we have these 5 focus points: the writer, the topic, the reader, the circumstances, and the language, which is essential here. Of course, it's important to bear in mind and to remember when talking about writer and reader, it is a bit difficult or different here because it's a speech, so it's a speech given, and so the intention is not for the reader to read the speech but to hear it. But it is the same terms that we use. So the person giving the speech is the writer, and the person listening to the speech is the reader. Another thing, it's very important here when working with political speeches that the writer, that you think about this, who is the writer politically? Is it in an American text, is it a Republican or is it a Democrat? Because that might be influential on the topic and also in the language. So you know this is something you worked with before when working with articles or documentaries, news, so forth. A very important thing when working with political speeches and non-fiction in general is the language. You could look at these overall themes, look at the composition, is there an introduction, a middle and end? How is the language, is it formal, informal? A way to do that is by looking at the different sentences. Is it active sentences or passive sentences? As in the example here, the dog bit me, that's an active sentence because the subject, grundled, is active in the sentence. It actually bit me. Whereas in the sentence below, I was bitten by the dog, that's a passive sentence because the subject, grundled, I wasn't very active. I was just bitten by the dog. The dog was actually the active one. If you want to learn more about active and passive sentences, you can work with it in your grammar, as I can actually see some of you already did or do right now. The use of figurative language, I'll return to that later on, but also look at the different word classes and also the forms of appeal as you know them. Another thing to be that's very important and to bear in mind when analyzing a political speech is the rhetoric devices. Retoriske virkemidler, we will call it in Danish. I'll just go through some of them. There is a full list in Tango, but I'll just point to some of them. Of course, we have the alliteration, when words that start with the same sound are used close together. In this quote by John F. Kennedy, you will see both the W, but also the P and the bear when I say the sentence, let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden. So this is alliteration, bogstavering. Allusion is when you refer to someone or something or a historic event or a text, like given here the forbidden fruit. Well, that's something from the Bible. You can refer to that. Anaphora is a kind of repetition where you repeat the same word in the following sentences in the beginning. Here is an example from Michelle Obama. With every word we utter, with every action we take, we know our kids are watching us. In this quote, you can actually also see the very heavy use of W. So we actually both have anaphora and alliteration in this sentence. Antithesis is when two contrasting words or ideas are put together. So you could talk about what is not going to happen and what is going to happen. In this example, this election is not about the miners, not about the militants, not about the power of the unions. It is about the disastrous failure of 3.5 years of conservative government. You kind of list the opposites here. Metaphor, well, you know, metaphors being this figurative language where you kind of hint, imply hidden comparisons to things that are unrelatable. Like, for instance, the energy, the faith and devotion which we bring to the endeavor will light our country. You could argue that energy, faith and devotion is not something that can literally light. It is metaphorically speaking. Oxymoron are these expressions, or in a sentence when you have two words that are very opposite and has a very paradox in the contraction of these two words. I am a deeply superficial person. That is that's a paradox, because you cannot both be very deeply or very deep as a person and be superficial at the same time. Parallelism, when you have the same kind of structure in the sentences, the use of repeating words and forms to give patterns and rhythm. Benjamin Franklin quote, "Tell me and I'll forget, teach me and I may remember, involve me and I will learn." So that's kind of a parallelism. I mentioned it before with repeating the first word in the start of a sentence, but it could actually also be a whole sentence. So we're repeating a word, a phrase, a sentence 2 or more times. Very famous speech from Martin Luther King, where he actually starts out a lot of sentences with, "I have a dream, I have a dream, I have a dream today." Rhetorical questions are also rhetorical device often used in speeches where you don't actually intend, or you have no intention for the audience to actually answer these questions, but the questions helps the audience ask questions or answer the question themselves in their head. There is a quote from Barack Obama here. "So tonight, let's ask ourselves, if our children should live to see the next century, if my daughters should be so lucky to live as long as Ann Nixon Cooper, what change will they see? What progress will we have made?" So that's an example of rhetoric questions. Finally, we also have simile, sammenligning, we would call it in Danish, quite similar to metaphors, but here we actually do have the word as or like. My love is like a red, red rose. That's you could call a simile in sammenligning. And finally, a tricolon, you could also call it just the rule of 3. That a lot of times in speeches, when listing, you list 3 words or 3 things. First, second, thirdly, or as in these 2 examples, friends, Romans, countrymen. That's from Shakespeare. But also David Cameron, when he said, "Britain's national interest is best served in a flexible, adaptable and open European Union." 1, 2, 3. So again, use the rhetoric pentagon, and when looking at language, have a focus on forms of appeal, but also these rhetorical devices when analyzing political speeches, because this is what you're going to do now. I have found the inaugural address made by Donald J. Trump when he was becoming president, or when he was inaugurated on January 20th, 1917. No, sorry, 2017, 1917. Well, wish it was so. I'll just show you in a bit where to find the text and also watch the address. It's about 20 minutes long. I want you to make an analysis of the speech using the tools that I've just given you, this rhetoric pentagon with a focus on language. And you don't have to hand in your work. I think that you've handed in enough and I don't actually have time to go through all of it. And since we can't have a sort of class talk about it, I want you to point out 3 important findings in your analysis, 3 things that you find quite important, that surprised you perhaps, or that, well, I knew he was like that, or it's I wasn't surprised when he said, or here you can actually see a rhetoric device, or so forth. Just 3 important findings from your analysis, and send it to me or share it in Microsoft Teams in our English team in there, and that will be enough for me. And hopefully we'll have time to go through some of this when we will meet up before the exam. And as mentioned before, I'll just show you where to find it. If you go to your English room in Tango, American Dream or Nightmare, in the bottom here you have both the inaugural address and also this speeches. And I'll just find it here. I have it here, the inaugural address. There's a short introduction, and then there is the address below here, the speech itself. And there's also a link to actually seeing the speech. So you can perhaps, if you want to listen to it while reading it, you can do that first. But I think it's also quite important to look at it, because there is, and I haven't given you this task, but sometimes body language is also something you can look at. And another was this different explanations to the different rhetorical devices. So this is something for you to work with, and again, you can always write me. I'll be helping the best I can, and have fun.